this program, we are going to discuss the rape of the lock. I have with me here in the studio Dr. Deborah Nuth from Colgate University, and she would be discussing Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock. Dr. Nuth.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm interested in all kinds of approaches to the rape of the lock, and it's just a question where to start.
Could we start with the occasion on which and for which The Rape of the Lock was written?
That's a great place. This is a poem based on a real event, a real cutting off of hair from a young lady's neck at a tea party. To cut off hair from a lady, if it wasn't too much hair, was actually just a gesture of affection. And then the gentleman would have the hair made up into a ring and would wear it as a gesture of his devotion to her. In this instance, it really happened that Lord Peter, his name in the poem is the Baron, snatched a lock of hair from the neck of Arabella Farmer. In the poem, her name is Belinda. Mm-hmm. And instead of laughing it off, Arabella Farmer took umbrage at this invasion of her person and threw a bit of a tantrum and made a scene. And there were lots of friends of the families involved, all present, and so it became a real rift in a very small society of which Alexander Pope was really a part. He wasn't at this party, but he, like Arabella Farmer and Lord Peter, was an upper-class Roman Catholic, and in fact probably all these people were the same age. Mm-hmm. We don't have Arabella Farmer's birth date, and I think she was probably trying to conceal it because she was getting a bit long in the tooth for a marriageable young lady. She was all of 24 when this poem was written, when the events the poem writes about take place. So a friend of all of the families and another Roman Catholic who wanted to try to keep this close-knit Roman Catholic society on good terms within this little cultural group, this friend, John Carroll, asked Pope to write a poem that would diffuse some of the hostility and resentment. And Pope produced The Rape of the Lock, and incidentally, I guess, almost produced probably his masterpiece at the same time.
The Rape of the Lock has been called a mock heroic poem. Now, can you place the poem, the Rape of the Lock, in the mock heroic tradition for our students?
The mock heroic is a wonderful device because it enables a very kind of sophisticated way to make fun of things and people by sounding as if you're flattering them but really mocking them at the same time. The idea really arose in France. I think Boileau first devised this idea and made the distinction between the burlesque and the mock heroic. Mm-hmm. He said in the burlesque, you write a poem about heroic figures like Dido and Aeneas, and you have them talk like fishwives. Mm-hmm. But in the mock heroic, you write a poem about fishwives, and you have them talk as if they were Dido and Aeneas. Mm-hmm. So you take trivial material and you blow it out of proportion. And so the style, the disparity between the style and the subject becomes the joke. Mm-hmm. And the joke is at least as much in the style as in whatever it is at which you're poking fun. So it's a gentle form of poking fun, I think. And
in England, it was not used by Pope for the first time, was it?
Right. Dryden really got the idea directly from Boileau, and he read an English translation of Le Lutrin, the sort of original mock heroic poem, really, by Boileau. And so Dryden's Macflecknoe is the great predecessor, I think, to The Rape of the Lock. The earlier mock heroic poem that makes fun of somebody that one is trying to trivialize. And Pope had in The Rape of the Lock, in the actual historical occasion for the poem, the ideal event, because here you had a trivial subject, and Belinda had made too much of it, and so Pope made more of it as a way of showing her how her values were disordered as she'd overreacted to what the Baron had done.
Right. So. But mock heroic also involves some element of intertextuality. Am I right?
Oh, yes.
Right. Then how does he use his predecessors in epic poetry?
You can deduce many things about the epic from the mock epic. If you don't read the Odyssey or Paradise Lost, you can get certain ideas about what they're like from seeing how Pope uses their traditions in a joking way, really, in the mock heroic. So Pope uses the conventions of the epic, and you can get a little sense of what they're like from reading a mock epic or a mock heroic poem like this. There's a battle. Here, of course, trivially enough, we have a card game as the battle. There's the arming of the hero in a very ceremonial way. And here it's Belinda putting on her makeup. That's the arming of the hero or
Would
the
you like
heroine.
to read out the lines, please?
Yes, I particularly like the description of Belinda's dressing table because it shows partly the real allusion to arms. The arming of the hero, but also it shows that Pope understands a certain amount about women, and he characterizes Belinda's dressing table as kind of a mess. And it's also got, the verse here has, and this is in a section of the poem that will not be in the students' textbook, so I'll read it for them. It's also got a wonderful fascination with the things on Belinda's dressing table. So even while Pope is suggesting that Belinda has disordered values and mixes up important and unimportant things on her dressing table.
Like love letters in the Bible.
Like love letters in the Bible.
And powders and puffs.
Yes. But it also shows that Pope likes the things on Belinda's dressing table, and he likes the fact that she has exotic perfumes and tortoiseshell combs and ivory combs from India, which is, in Pope's idea, I think the most exotic place in the world. And so that's the first line I wanted to quote, actually. And these verses are from Canto 1. Here's the dressing table described. This casket India's glowing gems unlocks, and all Arabia breathes from yonder box. The tortoise here and elephant unite, transformed to combs, the speckled and the white. Here, files of pins extend their shining rows, puffs, powders, patches, Bibles, billy-doos. There we have a whole list in a row of miscellaneous things. Now awful beauty puts on all its arms. The fair each moment rises in her charms, repairs her smiles, awakens every grace, and calls forth all the wonders of her face. Sees by degrees a purer blush arise, and keener lightnings quicken in her eyes. It's one of the most inflated descriptions of makeup, I think, ever. And even while I think Pope is suggesting there's a certain falseness about all of this, he also says it's quite wonderful how beautiful Belinda is. Even while there's also inherent in the verse, I think, a kind of criticism in that all on her dressing table are mixed up, on one level, love letters and makeup, but also Bibles. I always find that very confusing. And I've thought about the interpretation of that word a lot, and have got some ideas about it. And it's rather hard to decide whether they're accurate or not. But I used to decide that Belinda had numerous Bibles in different colors to go with different outfits, and which would show her, fashion sense rather than her biblical devotion. Sometimes, though, I wonder whether she has different editions of the Bible, the versions for different sects. Being a Roman Catholic, she owned, I'm sure, the Douay-Rheims Catholic Bible, but it may be that there were times when it was advisable to appear to have a Protestant Bible, since being a Catholic was, a rather dangerous thing to be. And it was going to, among other things, limit her marital possibilities so severely. So I think the plural Bibles is a very interesting kind of usage that Pope has in that list. But notice the way the list makes all the things seem parallel, because they're simply all together in that grammatical unit of a list, and they're all plural words.
Yes. And he doesn't sort of appear to give any special place either to puffs or powders or the Bible or the love letters. They all go together.
Yeah.
And that appears to me as a very urbane sort of attitude. that Pope is assuming here, the mask of the poet that Pope is wearing, is, if I may use the word, a modernist mask.
Yes, that's an interesting interpretation. It may well be that. It's often taken the other way. It's often taken by critics, I think, to read this poem, that Pope is simply mocking Belinda for having the wrong sense of values, and that what she thinks is trivial is important, and vice versa. But I think it's much more complicated than that, because the line we're discussing has got so many possible ambiguities about it, I think.
Yes.
And that Belinda's miscellaneous hodgepodge of things may embody something other than a disordered state of affairs and values in her view of the world.
Yes.
Certainly she jumbles herself into a certain unity as she presents herself on the Thames to get on the barge to go down to Hampton Court for tea, and that's where the poet compares her to the sun. Again, this is a mock heroic gesture to, essentially use hyperbole to overpraise the hero or the heroine, who's always the strongest or the most beautiful such a person could be. So that's another, great passage that also plays on the predecessors of Pope.
Would you like to read that passage?
Yes. And it's this is from Canto 2, and therefore is not in the student's text. Not with more glories in the ethereal plain the sun first rises o'er the purpled main, then, issuing forth, the rival of his beams launched on the bosom of the silver Thames. So Belinda rivals the sun as she sets forth on the River Thames on a sort of open-air expedition. Fair nymphs and well-dressed youths around her shone, but every eye was fixed on her alone. On her white breast a sparkling cross she wore, which Jews might kiss and infidels adore. Her lively looks a sprightly mind disclose, quick as her eyes, and as unfixed as those. Favors to none, to all she smiles extends. Oft she rejects, but never once offends. Bright as the sun, her eyes the gazers strike, and like the sun, they shine on all alike. Yet graceful ease and sweetness void of pride might hide her faults, if bells had faults to hide. If to her share some female errors fall, look on her face and you'll forget 'em all. And I guess this is a good moment to remember what Arabella Farmer looked like. And here she's wearing the cross. She had herself painted with this, must have been a favorite ornament, and perhaps a diamond cross if it was sparkling. And then she had added to her portrait the lines, on her white breast a sparkling cross she wore, which Jews might kiss and infidels adore. Which is very interesting, because it's hard to take that phrase as anything other than a kind of criticism, that cross has no spiritual significance. It's just an ornament, because it can be worshipped by people of any faith or no faith at all. And it's just an ornament to Belinda, who herself can be worshipped in a similarly non-committal way, because she will respond the same way to everyone. She won't give a preference to anyone. But she never offends anyone either, and that means probably she didn't offend Pope. He probably knew her. And she wasn't.
Pope was a young man.
And Pope was a young and, on some level, an attractive man as well. In this portrait from the exact period of the poem, he looks very appealing indeed, with a large folio of his own works on his knee. The problem with the picture doesn't demonstrate is that he's really almost a dwarf and humpbacked and crooked. And therefore, while he can admire Belinda and write about Belinda and try to patch up the quarrel between Belinda and the Baron, he could never himself be a suitor for Belinda. And I think there's a certain poignancy about that, and I think his there's almost a wistfulness over that those female errors that he claims, of course, she doesn't have, because if you look at her face, you'll never remember them.
Yes. We'll come back to this point, which appears to me a very interesting point. But before we go to that, let's revert once again to the element of intertextuality that Pope incorporates into his poem. that he wishes, it appears to me, that he wishes to be seen as a great poet in a great tradition, great British tradition of poetry. And he must have been thinking of people like Dryden or Shakespeare or Spenser or Chaucer before him. And so he must be thinking also of Milton or Homer and such people.
Yes.
What evidence do you find for that in the poem?
Yes, the poem is got lots of quotations. In fact, there's a quotation from Spenser, too, now that you mention him. When the nymph exulting fills aloud the sky, the walls, the woods, and long canals reply when she wins the card game. That's a quotation from Spenser's Epithalamion. So Pope, interlaces the poem with such quotations. I suppose the most memorable one is also from the card game, which is in your book in Canto 3, where Belinda sits down and is allowed to declare in the card game the trumps, the trump card. Let spades be trumps, she said, and trumps they were. And that's not even a couplet. That's a single line in which Pope alludes to Milton, to God's pronouncement in Genesis, let there be light, and there was light. It's not very many people who get to use language in that way, that when they say something, it comes true. And Belinda can do that. She's got that kind of linguistic quality. I always think that poets aspire to that themselves, and they want the word to come true in some way. And Pope is giving Belinda her due there. That she has that kind of limited power that with language she can do that. And but he's also, enriching the poem tremendously in a kind of complex web of allusion back through Milton to the Bible, all in one line.
Right, right. So there is so much of force in so little that, in terms of words. There's such little, just one line gives you so much about his predecessors in poetry, and it goes back to the Bible. There are allusions from Homer as well, aren't there?
Yes, yes. Well, the idea even of the ceremonial description of the arming of the hero is very much a Homeric tradition. I have a favorite Homeric allusion that I often point out to my students in this poem, and I will tell you about it. It's a pair of passages, and the first one is from Homer, and then the second one is from, again, a canto that isn't in your books, from The Rape of the Lock. And here is a standard mock heroic device, or heroic device, which is the elaborate description of a weapon. And here it's a weapon that has a pedigree, really. It's been handed down from hero to hero and has this tremendous significance. And the passage in Homer describes the spear of Pelops, and it's in the Iliad in Book 2. And if you'll bear with me, I'll just read you the passage and then see how Pope adapts it comically. Powerful Agamemnon stood up, holding the scepter Hephaestus had wrought him carefully. Hephaestus gave it to Zeus the king, the son of Cronos, and Zeus in turn gave it to the courier Argeiphontes, and Lord Hermes gave it to Pelops, the driver of horses, and Pelops again gave it to Atreus, the shepherd of the people. Atreus dying left it to Thyestes of the rich flocks, and Thyestes left it in turn to Agamemnon to carry and to be lord of many islands and over all Argos. So the history of this spear helps invest Agamemnon with the power he has. This is a translation by Richmond Lattimore from the Iliad. Now, of course, in Pope we get a much sillier weapon. It's a bodkin that's being described. It's sort of a long skewer or a hat pin, something that Belinda would be wearing up in her hair, perhaps. And that's what she decides she's going to stab the Baron with to get back at him for cutting her hair. And this is really a moment of high comedy. Now meet thy fate, incensed Belinda cried, and drew a deadly bodkin from her side. The same his ancient personage to deck her great-great-grandsire wore about his neck in 3 seal rings, which after, melted down, formed a vast buckle for his widow's gown. Her infant grandam's whistle, next it grew, the bells she jingled and the whistle blew. Then in a bodkin graced her mother's hairs, which long she wore, and now Belinda wears. So the bodkin has begun life as a seal ring on Belinda's grandfather's neck, and he's used it to seal letters, and it has had significance in that. It's been melted down. It's become a lady's belt buckle. It's become a child's toy, and now it's a piece of ornamental hair pin for Belinda, and she's now going to try to stab the Baron with it in this little scuffle that takes place after the hair is cut off. And so I think Pope expects you to remember the Homeric allusion, which makes the whole history of the increasingly trivial uses to which this bodkin has been put to make them seem even more trivial in juxtaposition with the Homeric allusion, and it makes for a good joke. That whole battle of the sexes scene, which is not in the part of the text that you have, is a great review of Renaissance love poetry and its conventions, and the ones that are hackneyed and overused in particular. So people kill each other with glances and are revived with a smile and all of that. So it makes a very nice little item of study if you get a chance to go on and read the fourth and fifth cantos of the poem. That would very much repay study.
So you would recommend that the students should read the fourth and the fifth cantos as well?
Well, I'd recommend they read the whole poem if they have it. Yes.
Because the first two cantos were actually written for the occasion. Later on, Pope enlarged it.
Yes. Pope added the Silphs, who your editor in Understanding Poetry has explained the source material for the Silphs, but he wanted to add the gods, of course, because gods are another thing that are very significant in epic poetry. You have to have gods who sort of run things from afar and keep intervening when things aren't going the hero's way. But I think the reason that he felt particularly drawn to these Rosicrucian gods is that they're called Silphs. And I think there's a pun Pope intends on self. What keeps women, from getting into trouble? But they're Silph, says Ariel, explaining himself to Belinda. Some call it honor, he says, but we know it's the Silph. And I think there's an implicit criticism here that Belinda's love of self is what prevents her from a generous response to the Baron's attempt at courtship. Is a curious way that while she's engaged in a courtship activity, she hasn't thought through what happens at the end. And she seems to think she can remain a coquette and have everybody looking at her and loving her indefinitely, when eventually she's going to have to pick one. She can't be like the sun and shine on all alike. She'll have to select one.
Right. What elements of language would you try to highlight in this connection? That about Pope's great poetry is also great because of the words used, because of the meter, because of the stuff of poetry.
And the concentrated use that he makes of language within the constraints of the heroic couplet. The description of Hampton Court begins Canto 3, and then I want to look at lines 7 and 8, quite a famous couplet, describing the palace, line 5 through 8. Pope talks about what takes place there, and lots of different things take place there. Not only is it a royal residence, but it's kind of a kind of club almost for important and influential people in the society. Because Pope points out that at line 5, here Britain's statesmen oft the fall for doom of foreign tyrants and of nymphs at home. And even if we just stop there and look at how those two lines work, he is using, of course, the word fall when it's being planned by the statesmen. He's using it to talk about both the political fall of foreign governments and the presumably moral fall, or the conquest, I guess, of nymphs, beautiful women at home. And it suggests a very strange mix of activities going on in Hampton Court Palace at the very least, and it's a bit of an attack on Britain's statesmen, at least as much as anything else.
And is there a use of solipsis there?
Yes, there's a definite rhetorical kind of turn in taking the fall of foreign tyrants in one sense, and the fall of nymphs at home in a different sense. So the concentration of forcing those words into juxtaposition and using the word fall only once in different senses with foreign tyrants and of nymphs, has used the tightness of the couplet to make the joke really much more apparent.
One last question, and that is that poetry is eventually made because of the feelings, strong feelings of the poets. What is it in this poem that makes the poem, derive its force from? Is it Pope's identity with Belinda, or what exactly is it?
This poem is famous for all the things we were talking about earlier, for its place in the mock heroic tradition and its relationship with its predecessors. But I think what makes it not an academic exercise only, not simply a kind of exercise in working out the permutations of all the different allusions one could make, as if it were a kind of puzzle. But because exactly of what you just said, that the strong feeling Pope has about this world, complicated feeling of yearning for it and willingness to question some of its values at the same time.
Thank you so much for coming to the studio and giving this valuable interview. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.